Tyson Fury says that David Adeleye is the future of the heavyweight division. He said, quote, David Adeleye is the future of this division. I told him the other night in the changing rooms, I said, you've got belief in yourself, Dave, because you're going to take over the division, mate. And he's great sparring, very, very good sparring. If he was no good to me, then I wouldn't bring him into my training camps. But he gives excellent work, so I keep bringing him in. Ever since the second Wilder fight, I keep bringing him in time and time again. He keeps learning, keeps listening, and he can be the next Lancaster Bomber, I think, for sure. Okay, those are the words of the Gypsy King, Tyson Fury. And it's also got a quote here from Adeleye himself, who says that he's actually insured on one of Tyson Fury's cars up there in Morecambe. So whenever he goes up to train with Tyson Fury, he rings him up and says, can I use the car? That shows how frequent a visitor he is to Tyson Fury's gym, and also how close him and Tyson Fury seem to be. Now, I've long said for, the entirety of Adeleye's career, or at least the fights I've seen of his, I've long said that I think he has a lot of potential. He is a tall guy, relatively so, right? 6'4.5", 26 years of age, but yet he doesn't weigh that much. As you can see here, on his pro debut, he was 217. For his last fight, he was 231. So for a guy who's 6'4.5", that isn't that heavy. Okay, it's not Deontay Wilder light, but he's not that heavy. And this allows him to be more mobile than most fighters that height. He's also very well coordinated. He's got good balance. He throws his shots with good form. So I think there's, as I say, a lot of potential there. Now, a few fights back, he fought Kamil Sokolowski. And a lot of people seem to think that Sokolowski was robbed in the fight. I wasn't one of those people. You can go back and watch my post-fight review right here from a year ago. I thought that Adeleye actually won the fight. And I was kind of not surprised necessarily, because I know what boxing fans are like, but I didn't think that that was some big robbery. If you gave it to Kamil Sokolowski by a round or whatever, no problem. But I thought that this was a fight which you could certainly see in Adeleye's favor. I was, kind of scratching my head as to why people thought it was so clear in favor of Sokolowski. But hey, that is what that is. So, again, a lot of people after that thought, oh, this Adeleye is not going anywhere. He struggled with Sokolowski. A lot of people struggle with Sokolowski. He's, I think we can all agree, a lot better than his record suggests. But in that fight against Sokolowski, Adeleye never got hurt. He never at any point looked like a fighter who is out of his depth in terms of his demeanor in the ring, his body language. These are the kind of things I look for. I look for how confident a fighter is, particularly when there's some stiff competition in there with him, when a fighter is actually pushing him and making it difficult for him. I want to see what his body language is like. I want to see the look in his eyes. I want to see the way he responds to adversity. And David Adeleye seemed very calm in that fight. He didn't seem bothered at all. Also, for a couple of Adeleye's fights, I speculated in my videos that he may have some kind of injury to his left shoulder. I'm not sure whether he did, but he wasn't using his left jab the way he normally would. He wasn't snapping it out. He was kind of pouring with it. And I thought that could be indicative of some kind of injury there, because I've been in a situation like that. When I was boxing as an amateur, I actually dislocated my shoulder in sparring, and the shoulder was never the same again. I could never really snap my jab with the same confidence. Even after the dislocation had healed, I could never snap it with the same confidence again, because sometimes when I would train hard, the shoulder would feel funny. It would feel kind of loose in its socket, and I really needed surgery, right? But yeah, I wondered whether Adeleye had some kind of issue there. In any event, one of the things I've remarked on about Adeleye in the past is his confidence. You see, people look at things like who you've beaten. They look at your height, reach, and punching power and speed and all this kind of stuff. But they often miss the demeanor of the fighter, the confidence of the fighter. And this can actually be more important than all the other stuff in some cases. I'll give you an example. Dillian White, Dillian White, early on in his career, this is before he served his ban, when he was being trained by Chris Oko. He was dismissed by loads of people in the British boxing community. And when I say community, I mean the fans, right? Loads of people totally dismissed him. They looked at him and said, he's not very well coordinated. He looks kind of clumsy. His technique ain't great. Plus, he doesn't have much experience. And they wrote him off. And even after he came back from his ban, when he was building up to fight Anthony Joshua, they were writing him off, saying AJ's going to knock him out in a round. I was one of the few people who was actually looking forward to that AJ fight. And I said, no, this is not going to be, I don't think, like a normal AJ fight. This is actually going to be a lot more competitive than that. And the reason I was thinking that way is because of Dillian White's confidence, because of his attitude. He didn't have the attitude of a normal, regular, garden variety heavyweight. No, his attitude was different. He was far more confident than the average fighter you'll see. You see, you've got certain guys, like, let's say, David Price, who had all the amateur credentials. But when you look at his demeanor, when you hear him talk, when you see his attitude, there's something missing there. Even though he had certain technical things going on for him, and as I say, he had the amateur background, I was never sold on David Price. You can go back and look at the post-fight video I did when he fought Matt Skelton. And I said that I saw danger signs in there. I saw warning signs with Price. Because when Matt Skelton had him on the ropes, Price's body language didn't look good. He seemed to lack confidence in that situation against an old Matt Skelton. Bear in mind, he stopped Skelton in the second round. So a lot of people, because remember, this is when David Price was still unbeaten, a lot of people were coming at my neck saying, what are you talking about? Price won the fight in the second round. How can you say that this, that, and the other? You know, why do you have doubts about him? Well, I had doubts about him, partly because of the fact that he got dropped a load of times in the amateurs and stopped. But again, also because of that body language. His demeanor didn't exude confidence to me. Whereas with Dillian White, it did exude confidence. I'd heard these stories about Dillian White sparring David Haye and Derek Chisora when White had very few amateur fights. And he was trying to take their heads off in sparring. This is a guy who hadn't even turned pro yet. And he's going in there against two of the top guys in the country and he's trying to take their heads off. Then he was going around sparring people like Mark Potter, David Price, the Klitschko's, Tyson Fury, all these kind of people. And the same stories or similar stories were coming out of those spars. He was going in there trying to take people's heads off. And this is a guy with nowhere near as much experience as the people that he's in training camp with. A lot of fighters are intimidated. They go into a training camp of a much more experienced fighter and they're all polite. You know, they don't want to ruffle any feathers. They spar politely and all this kind of thing. Dillian White was like, to hell with that. I'm going in there in this guy's gym to take his head off. And so that is what enabled Dillian White, combined with his punching power and his boxing brain and all this kind of thing, to be as successful as he's been. Yeah, he hasn't become a world champion or anything like that. But there were people saying Dillian White would never reach past British level. The British title level was his level. He wouldn't go any further than that. And of course, he's gone much further than that. So that just shows you how valuable confidence is. If you have confidence, it can actually compensate for a lot of your, let's say, deficiencies with regards to talent. It can make up for all that kind of stuff, or at least, if not completely, then partly, you see? And there are other examples I could give you. Fighters more talented than Dillian White, like Errol Spence. When he first turned pro, I've told this story many times, there was this sparring match that he had with Floyd Mayweather in the Mayweather gym. And at that time, so many welterweights, like world level welterweights and junior welterweights, were fans of Mayweather. Why were they fans? This guy's supposed to be your rival. You're supposed to be going in there trying to prove that you're better than him. But instead, they were acting like they were fans and they were in awe of him. And when some of these guys would go to the Mayweather gym, they were all sycophantic and what have you. Whereas the story that we've all heard now about Errol Spence in the Mayweather gym, and this is again when he's just turned pro. This is basically an amateur. He's going in there against Mayweather. And there's all the people, oh God, Mayweather's going to get you, you know, what it's like in that, they call it the doghouse. And Errol Spence laughed it all off and he went in there and tried to take Floyd's head off. And because of how well Errol Spence did in sparring against Floyd, they actually had apparently a bit of a fallout, a bit of a bust up in the gym after that because of how well Errol Spence did. So that let me know that Spence's mentality was different. This is not going to be your average contender. This is a guy with far more confidence than your average contender, so far more of that deep inner self-belief. Similar situation with Tyson Fury. Early on in his career, when he went over to the Klitschko camp, he never sparred Klitschko, but he trained alongside him. And when he came back, Steve Bunce on, I'm not sure if it was Setanta or whatever show it was at the time, whatever network it was on at the time, but he interviewed Fury and he asked him whether he was impressed by Klitschko, having visited his camp. And Fury said, not at all. I wasn't impressed at all. Now, at the time, Fury didn't have the number of fans he has today. So the response, I remember very well, was overwhelmingly negative when Fury said that. People were saying, oh my gosh, look at this guy saying he's not impressed. What an idiot. This is what people were saying. Whereas I was saying, wow, that's some serious confidence he's got there. And that's the kind of attitude you need to beat a Klitschko. And of course, Fury has told the story of when he was in the sauna with Klitschko and he managed to outlast him in there. And he was looking directly into Klitschko's eyes and putting more water on the coals and all that kind of stuff. And he outlasted Klitschko in the sauna. And he said that was the moment that he realized he had Klitschko beat mentally. Now, Klitschko, of course, said he didn't remember it. And many people just dismissed all that as silly. Whereas I actually thought, yeah, I think he did have Klitschko mentally from that point because I know how petty Vladimir Klitschko is. Very petty kind of guy, a control freak, not only in his fights with all the shenanigans and the spongy canvases and, giving the opponent dodgy gloves and all this type of stuff, as in ill-fitting gloves. Not only with all that, but even in the gym, he's a control freak. So when a fighter like Tyson Fury comes in there and isn't doing the usual friendly, oh, thank you, Mr. Klitschko, I'm so grateful for you letting me in your training camp. When Fury was like, nah, this guy don't impress me. I'm not intimidated by this guy. I'm not doing all the, oh, thank you, Mr. Klitschko stuff. Nah, that is exactly the kind of attitude I knew you needed to beat a Klitschko. Okay, I didn't know whether Tyson Fury had the ability to beat Klitschko, but I knew he had the attitude to beat him. Same with Derek Chisora when he fought Vitaly Klitschko. I didn't think he had the physical ability, the technical ability, etc., necessarily to beat Vitaly, but his attitude, I knew, would allow him to do better than most people. Because a lot of people were saying that fight would be over in a couple of rounds. I was saying, no, I don't think so. Chisora is not going to freeze like a lot of guys do against Vitaly because his attitude's different. So anyway, long preamble here, but David Adeleye also has an attitude that exudes confidence. His body language, his demeanor, it all exudes this confidence. Even the look in his eye is different than most fighters. David Adeleye, when you see him in interviews, he doesn't have this vacant look like, let's say, a Daniel Dubois, no disrespect to him, or even AJ these days, that kind of vacant look. No, Adelaye's eyes are alive, confident. He talks confidently. And this is a guy, to my knowledge, who didn't have loads and loads of amateur fights. He did box as an amateur, but he didn't have a vast amount of experience. Yet he has a level of confidence which would make people think that he must have had a huge number of amateur fights. But no, there is innate confidence there, that he's brought into boxing and of course is built upon. So yeah, long story short, as far as him being the future of the heavyweight division, I certainly think he has potential. And you look at Tyson Fury's sparring roster, he's got some very talented fighters on there. David Adeleye being one of them. And the other one, of course, of serious note, being, God, I nearly said Jerome Ennis. I used to get them mixed up all the time, even though they're different weights. No, Jared Anderson. David Adeleye and Jared Anderson. The next generation, potentially. And I expect them to meet somewhere down the line, David Adeleye and Jared Anderson. Anderson also has that type of confidence that Adeleye has, the kind of confidence I'm talking about. And I think it really says a lot about Tyson Fury and why he's been able to become as good as he is. That he has potentially two of the best heavyweights in the future, maybe future champions, training with him in David Adeleye and Jared Anderson. I'm not sure whether he's going to be doing any more sparring with Anderson, because Anderson has seemed to indicate that he wants to take the training wheels off and become a fully fledged contender rather than being a sparring partner for the champions. But we'll see. In any event, if you go back to the 1970s, even 1960s, Muhammad Ali was sparring with people like Larry Holmes. Larry Holmes, of course, went on to be the next dominant heavyweight after Muhammad Ali. You see, so steel sharpens steel, and also it shows the way that Ali's team, or Ali himself, recognized how talented certain people were, and that's why he wanted them in his camp. He wanted these really talented guys. Whereas you look at other heavyweights, Anthony Joshua being one example, you think, who's he got in his gym? Who is he sparring with? Yeah, he spars in Sheffield with these amateurs, and some of them have got potential, but how many of them, of the people that we know AJ has sparred with, look like potential world champions? How many of them have the kind of confidence that I've just described? You know, do they come across that way in interviews? Just a question. Now, not all heavyweight champions, top heavyweights, go down this road of bringing in really, really tough sparring. I'm not exactly sure why. An example I'll give you is Mike Tyson. In the 1980s, when Tyson was at his peak, he was sparring people like Jesse Ferguson. He was a regular in the Tyson gym as far as sparring partners go. Jesse Ferguson. Mike Jameson was also in there. He did spar Greg Page. Page actually dropped him ahead of the Buster Douglas fight. But Page was really way over the hill by the time Tyson was sparring him in the gym. Now, obviously, in the amateurs, Mike Tyson sparred Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield. But in the pros, when he was champion, he didn't, to my knowledge anyway, have this elite sparring roster. He was sparring kind of second and third tier guys, sometimes complete unknowns. Oliver McCall, of course, was another regular in Mike Tyson's gym for sparring. McCall did go on to capture the WBC title, but again, McCall already had losses. You know, McCall wasn't seen as some future star, and he never became a future star of the division. He was basically a one-hit wonder. He knocked out Lennox Lewis, and he didn't really do anything else other than that. Yeah, he had some wins over people like Maskayev, and did he beat Francesco Damiani? I forget now. I think he beat Henry Akinwande much later on. So he had, you know, some decent wins, but he was never a serious, you know, top-level heavyweight for a number of years. McCall was never that. And as I say, he was seen as a journeyman, actually, when he was in the Mike Tyson camp, being one of his main sparring partners. So, yeah, Mike Tyson never really had this elite sparring roster the way Muhammad Ali did, or the way that Tyson Fury does. And even in the 1990s, when Mike Tyson came out of prison, who was he sparring? And he wasn't sparring the future of the division. Is that because the prospects, or at least their teams in the heavyweight division, were afraid of sending their guys into the Tyson camp because they might get ruined? Because it might be bad PR if they get knocked out by Tyson in sparring? Is that the reason that he didn't have this elite sparring roster? I don't know. But I just remember that going into all those fights, like against Holyfield, against, much later on against Lennox Lewis, but Tyson's second reign as champion, which was relatively short, you didn't hear about him sparring anybody great. it was all these randoms, these random guys. I know one of Mike Tyson's main sparring partners in the 90s was a guy called Nate Tubbs, who was actually I think the nephew of Tony Tubbs, something like that. And again, Nate Tubbs, just a journeyman. So I'm not sure what that was all about. And did that hurt Mike Tyson? The fact that he wasn't getting the kind of sparring that some of his rivals were getting. So for example, going into the Holyfield fights, Holyfield was sparring with David Tua, which is probably the best sparring you can get for Mike Tyson. Tua, of course, is not exactly like Tyson, wasn't as good as Tyson, but that's about, in terms of sparring, that's about as good as you're going to get if you're preparing for a Tyson fight, is David Tua. That's who Holyfield was sparring with. Who was Tyson sparring with? I can't even remember the guys he was sparring going into the Holyfield fight because they were so miscellaneous. So, yeah, maybe that hurt Mike Tyson. I don't know, not being able to get that kind of elite sparring that the Muhammad Ali's got. When I say elite, I mean future elite, right? He was obviously sparring Larry Holmes and many other people, contenders from the 1960s and 70s. And again, Tyson Fury these days sparring very talented fighters like Jared Anderson and David Adeleye. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on the situation. I'm certainly not going to dismiss what Tyson Fury says here with regards to David Adeleye. I think that indeed he wouldn't keep bringing Adeleye back in to training camp if he wasn't giving him good work. And Adelaye's confidence impresses me, as well as his physical ability. Of course, he's got plenty of work to do. He isn't the finished article. I'm not saying he's going to go on to be the invincible number one in the division, but there's potential. There is potential, and I look forward to a future fight between Adeleye and Anderson. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you think that Tyson Fury is going to turn out to be right here and that Adeleye will be the future? Or do you think he's wrong? And hey, Tyson Fury has got things wrong in the past. Mayweather's got things wrong. I remember Mayweather saying that Chad Dawson was going to be the next number one pound for pound king and take over boxing. Never happened. So, just because a fighter is elite and has achieved so much like a Mayweather or a Tyson Fury, they get things wrong like everybody else. They get predictions wrong. I mean, even the great Hall of Fame trainer Manny Stewart, when he was a pundit on HBO, he got plenty of predictions wrong like we all do, right? None of us are Nostradamus here. But I tend to suspect that Tyson Fury might be onto something with regards to David Adeleye. That's my take on it. Give me your take in the comments below. If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got an Element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, is decentralized, and is 100% censorship free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment. You can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.